I'm now pleased to introduce the next speaker, which is Mick Matthews. Hi, Mick. Mick has over 30 years experience working with HIV/AIDS, drug use and harm reduction at a global fund with an international network of people who use drugs. And he is currently with a global network of sex work projects. He has lived with HIV for 35 years. He is a grandfather and a great-grandfather, which he doesn't seem to believe gives him too much street credibility. I'm not sure if that is true. Sounds pretty impressive to me, which most certainly gives him street credibility, though, is, for me, being a crazy cat lady myself, is that he lives alone in France with his best friend, who is a cat. So we're interested to hear from you. Welcome.
Thank you. Just to begin, it's always difficult writing a presentation when you don't know what anybody else is going to say, and I've never been to this conference before. So if I've misjudged the tone, I apologize, but I don't apologize for anything I'm about to say, okay? Okay, and so first I'd like to thank the organizers, and in particular Johan, who we met at the CND in Austria last year, and he followed up, and hence I'm here, and I'm very happy to be here. I'm here as a representative of the International Network of People Who Use Drugs, INPUD. And INPUD are a global, peer-based and peer-led organization that seeks to promote the health and defend the rights of people who use drugs. I'm also here as an injecting drug user for preference and a person who likes and enjoys taking drugs. For policymakers, law enforcement, psychologists, academics, religious leaders, and the self-appointed custodians of our moral and ethical standards, this statement alone means they believe they know me. If I was to add that I've been in prison a few times, then it's like, wow. It's like they're my intimate partner. They think they know me so well. But they don't know me. They don't know I've worked for 30-odd years in HIV, health and drugs. They don't know about the years of community voluntary work, or that I've got 3 children and 10 grandchildren, as you've heard, none of whom have been in prison, none of whom have problematic drug use issues, although they all take drugs from time to time, or that I've had a novel published, and that I'm a decent illustrator. They don't know any of these things. But because they feel they do, and because I use drugs, then I'm untrustworthy, a deviant, psychologically impaired, a pariah. They think I should be punished, criminalized, and ignored and excluded from discussions and decision-making about drugs and drug use or any other health-related issue. Even when people who use drugs are included in discussions on decriminalization, for example, our evidence, our rationale, and inputs are ignored, fall on deaf ears, or perhaps just come up against decision makers who are hard of thinking. And that's something you've recently experienced in Norway, where your policymakers failed to have the courage to take the first step. And I think it's a real shame and a slap in the face for drug users who have worked so hard for many years. And it's yet another example of politics, bad, ill-informed politics, winning out over common sense and evidence. Criminalization of drugs and drug users is a tool of repression. It's not based on any scientific assessment, but has everything to do with those who are associated with the drugs. Historically, in the United States, anti-opium laws were directed at Chinese immigrants. Anti-cocaine laws to control black men and women in the southern states. And anti-marijuana laws directed at Mexican migrants and Mexican Americans. In Europe, the United Kingdom and France, through their colonial opium franchises, were able to set aside their massive hypocrisy to lead the charge to criminalize drugs. Germany, who were slightly slower to pick up that banner, but saw themselves as leaders of addiction research, and they too got it wrong. And of course, many other countries then jumped on the prohibition bandwagon without any thought or understanding. And before anyone quotes me Sweden as a success story for drug policies and drug laws, there has been a 600% increase in drug-related deaths in Sweden over the last 20 years. Rates of hepatitis C are among the highest in Europe. And rates of drug use continues to increase, in particular amongst young people. So that repressive, prohibitionist approach is really working. Way to go, Sweden. It's interesting, isn't it, that so many countries' drug policies are aligned in some form or other with the drug policies in the very countries that are vilified for their abuse of human rights. Most European countries would be appalled to be aligned with Saudi Arabia, Islamic State or the Taliban, because there's not a lot of difference, Iran, Indonesia, North Korea. And maybe European countries don't have the death penalty for drug offences. But they've criminalised me for my whole adult life, as they have with thousands of others, hundreds of thousands of others. And we can see how quickly that situation can deteriorate, as in the extrajudicial murder of people who use drugs in the Philippines. And even, in a different context, the barbaric Texas abortion laws, anti-abortion laws. But of course, I forget, because you know me, and because of that knowledge, you know I don't deserve rights. Over the past decade, there have been increasing claims that the world is moving towards a critical turning point in international drug policy, based on a growing recognition that governments must consider alternative approaches to policy which include decriminalisation. But decriminalisation is often discussed as if there is only one model, leading to a view that decriminalisation anywhere equals progress. However, there are many different models of decriminalisation in operation, all with different impacts. INPUD believes it is time to disrupt that misconception that decriminalisation efforts unquestionably represent progress when they have been developed with little or no consultation with people who use drugs. The recently published report from INPUD, Drug Criminalisation, Progress or Political Red Herring, and you can download that from the INPUD website, explores the issues of decriminalisation in depth and presents 5 primary recommendations. 1. All models of decriminalisation must fully decriminalise people who use drugs, including the removal of all administrative sanctions and mechanisms of monitoring, surveillance, and punishment for use and possession of drugs, removing the use of arbitrary quantity thresholds or threshold amounts that result in criminal records, ensuring that operational police fully understand policy and legislative changes associated with full decriminalisation, and establishing independent and ongoing monitoring for the criminal justice system. The rest of them are not quite as long as that one. 2, people who use drugs and their community-led organisations must be involved in all stages of the reform process, including the provision of clear, accessible and credible information to community on any policy or legal changes. And then 3, full decriminalisation must also include specific strategies to end stigma and discrimination against people who use drugs and ensure adequate funding for such interventions. 4, full decriminalisation must include scale-up and expansion of access to harm reduction and social care for people who use drugs relevant to the local context and needs. And finally, 5, once full decriminalisation is adopted within jurisdictions, it should only be as a step along a continuum that has as its clear and ultimate goal the full legal regulation of all drugs in a timely manner. And that is the kicker, right there. Full legal regulation of all drugs. This is anathema to those who carry the banner for a drug-free society. But what's so good about a drug-free society? And this brings us back to what I was saying at the start of the presentation. Those self-appointed arbiters of what constitutes a decent human being don't know me, and they don't know people who use drugs. But they do know about prejudice, stigma, discrimination, hypocrisy, and they conveniently ignore science and evidence and rights. This baseless prejudice stifles intelligent debate and surely raises questions about the integrity of our democracies. If drug policies are made without the full involvement of people who use drugs, ignoring science and evidence, made by people who are informed by prejudice, stigma, discrimination, hypocrisy, and intentional misinformation, what does that say about the way we make our laws? People who use drugs are not going away. Organisations like INPUD are giving us a platform to be heard. We are learning, and we are learning fast. And we want governments and legislators to learn too. Learn to work with us and not treat us as the enemy. Learn and embrace the knowledge that you are not the experts. Don't be hard of thinking. Instead, be intelligent, and we as drug users will help you. Thank you. I know, I finished early.
Yeah, thank you, Mick. I'm just going to give you a gift here. All the speakers will get this mittens.
Okay. Cool.
Can you see them? And it says, support, don't punish. So that's for you.
Thank you very much.
And it was really interesting to listen to you, and we are fortunate to have you back on stage after the next speaker to have a short Q&A.
Sure.